Good morning. I hope you are well. It's nice to be sort of back in the sense that holidays are over and holiday seasons, although a number of people are away today. But we have, if you've been with us over the summer, we've listened to some really brilliant messages that we've heard in the past, and they're on the blog if you want to go back to them. But the latest one that we listened to again was one about the search for meaning, where it was about the white canvas. And one of the lines that kept coming through that was, what you see is what you see. And I'd given that a lot of thought since. And then I've sort of arrived at this secondary line, which is when you see is when you see. Because actually sometimes there's those moments where the light just shines and all of a sudden something that you've not seen before just illuminates in your life to the point where you cannot unsee it. It's like, call it a dawning or a revelation or something that you're just like, I've never seen that before, but now I see it so clearly, I don't know how I've missed it. And we've all had those moments where suddenly we see something that we can't believe we've not seen up to this point. And I want to sort of talk a little bit about that this morning. And what I'm hoping is that I can convey something of what I've seen. But if when you see is when you see, it might not be this morning that this is the morning you're going to see it. But I can't worry about that. So we have this expression, don't we, that hindsight is a wonderful thing. And I don't like hindsight. I like foresight. I like to be able to see in advance. I like to be able to anticipate. I like to be able to think, I can see that coming. But so often in life, the reason why we need hindsight is because you sometimes have to go through something to learn what it is you had to learn by going through it. And you also sometimes have to have feedback from different people in your life that you'll do something and they'll tell you, you know, when you did that, actually, that landed like that with me. Actually, it wasn't what you thought it was. And so I think probably learning things and seeing things retrospectively is very, very necessary, even if we wish it weren't. And so what we develop as we go through life is we develop some things that become the stories, that are always the stories we've learnt about our past, about our present, the things that we're seeing happening in the future. And a lot of those become the usual stories in our lives, or what we could call the common narrative. Now, we've talked a lot about a common narrative around church and what it's typically been the usual story in church. But I also want you to realise that that might be very relevant for some of you. In fact, I would say it's relevant for all of us because we all have a God story. But there are also other common narratives that you might be missing, that might be in your blind spots because they're your usual stories. The stories that are always playing out in your life, the ones that seem the most obvious way the world is to you, that unless we start to open ourselves up to the possibility of a different story, they will continue to play out and they will become the dogmatic things that your life just orbits around all the time. And if we start to observe and be really deliberate, what we'll start to see is plot holes in those stories, gaps where we're like, if I really was to question that and pause, that doesn't quite ring true. And part of what Q's quest is about is saying, let's be prepared to ask the questions about the plot holes in all of the usual stories to work out whether actually that's the case. And I mean, you saw on that clip there that they had this story of what this magical scroll was going to uncover. And when they actually got to it, in the reality, it was something quite different. And if you're not prepared to then deal with the consequences in the moments when life turns out quite different, you never ask the questions to truly see that there wasn't a secret ingredient, that it was the face in the mirror. A guy called Jim Palmer said this: religion gets people all worked up over the idea of cultivating a better relationship with God. But what they most need is a healthier relationship with themselves. People are suffering every day, not because of a deficient relationship with a deity in the sky, but because of a dysfunctional relationship with the person in the mirror. So let's ask ourselves some questions this morning. So I had very much a common narrative that I was not very awake to until I was. And that was that the story in my life was that I'm a problem and I'm going to really need saving, and I'm going to have that saving come from outside myself because I'm a problem. So something magical is going to have to happen that saves me. A little bit like on that first clip, that there was going to be some magical scroll that I could open and it would all make sense. So when I was 12, I grew up in church my whole life. My dad had a sort of job in local government, and then he sort of on the side helped look after a church. So there's clear patterns. There's clear patterns that we all follow in life, isn't there? But when I was 12, I invited Jesus into my heart, and he would stop me being a problem, he would remove anxiety, and he would keep me safe. And that was the story that I followed for many, many, many years. And I gave it all to Jesus, and he did magic. And then what happened was I added a number of rituals to that magic, so the magic worked. And I'm always willing to share my stories, because I think sometimes you feel a bit silly, but I think it just humanizes us all, because we all have silly stories. And when I was at school, I was a really anxious, really, really anxious child, and I was very afraid to speak in class. And so I believed that if at the end of every day I thanked God that in each of my lessons the teacher didn't pick on me, that might mean that the following day the teachers didn't pick on me to ask a question on the spot in class. And that was just one example of some of the rituals that this God story gave me something that was going to look after me and stop me feeling so scared in the world. And as I got older, I added a few extremes to the pot. And my life became, by my late teens, my life orbited around this story. It was the story around which all of my decisions were made. And increasingly, without my brain involved, there was no conscious questioning of those stories. This is what I did, because I could not afford to lose the story. And sometimes in our lives, the stories that have become so fixed and so rigid that are rituals of whatever story, whether it's to do with a conscious one you have about God or not, we can't afford to lose them. And so we have to keep all of the rituals that go with those stories. Now, I was not free, and I was certainly not convinced. And in some ways, I think it was probably the performance of my lifetime. Not because I was being insincere with anyone else, but because I was playing it out in my own life and keeping the questions even from myself. But what I have to also acknowledge now, aged 47, a long way from 12, is that I cannot say for sure that I am not still doing this in other areas of my life. Because I know I still have some no-go areas where I don't want the stories to be questioned. And I know I don't want to be questioned because of how I react if people try to question them. And I know there's territory where I think, no, don't walk there. Just don't go there in my life. And so I would be fairly foolish if I tell myself, well, I freed myself from all of the times in my life I'm ever going to have done that. Because if I don't learn that I did that once, I haven't learned that I might be doing it again or again or again. And so I'll keep going around that same cycle. Now, some of you had the same or even more extreme common narrative around the Jesus and church story. And others of you didn't go that far because perhaps you didn't need to. But enough of you dipped your toe in the water, and I'm telling you, it's sticky stuff. And more of it is probably attached to you than you perhaps realise. And although others of you do not call it a God story as such, you've had your own God story because there's things you have worshipped, things you have served, things that are fixed in your life that you have to keep you safe, and rituals. So just for a couple of minutes, just have a think about the answers to these questions, or the questions that these questions bring up in you. What story does your life orbit around? Where can you be extreme in your views of where can you be extreme in the views you hold about what or who should be saved or held to account for their sins? What story can you not afford to lose? Where do you sense yourself reacting? And what questions might you be pushing down because the answers could so shift the equilibrium of your life that you just don't go there? Who or what might your God or gods be, and where do you worship? And here's some examples of where we can all worship. Feeling comfortable, not rocking the boat, speaking your mind, people-pleasing, money, the next exciting thing, your partner's needs, your children's needs, your views, your isms, your pains, perhaps your successes. And I want to really encourage you to go away even after this morning and think, where do I serve? Where do I worship? Where are my usual stories? And how is that working for you or not? I have been judged many times in life by people who worship gods by other names, but believe that I'm the only one with interested in religion, which I'm not. So let's own it and call it. So, I've misjudged how to file pieces of paper this morning. Now, we can fail to see that we have places where we've handed responsibility for our lives to something that is going to magically happen or not happen without our effort or conscious participation. I had beliefs along the line of, God has a plan. Let's pray about the will of God. Others have everything happens for a reason. If it's meant to be, it will be. Will it? Who or what is the reason and meaning behind such magic? And why does it bring us such comfort? For me, I think it's because it subsidizes the gap between what we see, what we expect, what we'd like, what our reality is, what we're afraid of. It deals with discrepancies. It deals with injustices. Because something, somewhere, is sorting all of this out. And it might be. But what if it isn't? What if some of the situations you are in are resting on you? Not on the magic of something outside, but on the magic of what's in you, of your ability to see, fully awake, to understand, fully enlightened, and to decide, fully empowered, to do something or to do nothing with wisdom by the bucketful to know the difference. Because part of the all, the Christ story, not just the Jesus will save me story, it's bigger. Because it's the all story, Christ in you. And to me, that allows for partnership. Whatever the divine is outside of me, if that's possible because it's all, partners with whatever the divine all is inside of me, and we get and both, not either or. When the light shone on my story, it was incredibly disruptive and far from peaceful. And the real God story of our lives is counter-religion, counter-culture, and it doesn't remove anxiety, it confronts it head on, and it has things to say. Because religion in all forms is going to ask you to discount yourself from the story and expect you to comply in the name of piety and peace. And I am becoming less and less interested in anything of this kind. And I am a great fan of peace and harmony, but it is overrated when it comes at the price it comes at. And sometimes the disruption is the best thing that happens in terms of revealing the truth. We could say so much about that and how the messages come to us in life. Are they diluted? Are they watered down? Who is getting us to believe what? But I have about 8 minutes. So I will just do what I've planned to say. But loads in there. So why do we actually need to deconstruct some of the powerful fixed stories in our lives? It's actually because they're incredibly destructive to us and to others. Even the peaceful ones, and often especially the ways that we've found to keep our peace. There is an undercurrent and things going on behind the curtain in that appearance of peace. That is not good, and we should tackle. Now, in 2007, probably when I'm in my 30s by now, this is when my absolute narrative came crashing to the floor, and it had been building up for a few years, to be fair. I was in a terrible situation that, again, I would be willing to share, but it's not just my story, so I'm looking after others in the story as well as myself, but I was in a really, really terrible situation, and it was not getting any better, and I was just hoping, hanging on by a thread, and I was seriously waiting for magic. serious magic. And I was right on the edge of losing my mind and also losing everything. I was right on the edge of bankruptcy, literally within days. And I went to stay with my sister and my brother-in-law at the time, called Rob, and they saw I was not good. I had a 4-year-old with me, Graham was at home, and I was really not good. And they asked me some questions, some really difficult questions. And I will never forget this conversation. It was a defining moment for me. I rolled out my answers, my Jesus answers, and I was passionate, I was sincere, I was coming out fighting. I was genuinely enraged in the most righteous sense of the world that my magic was coming and that I was going to be vindicated because I was doing the right thing. And my sister, she obviously was very upset because she feels me and we're close, and Rob was very kind, but I look back now and he was very wise with me because he sensed that I couldn't budge from where I was very easily at all because I was utterly entrenched. And when I look back, he asked me questions, but he was so gentle and he forced me way beyond my comfort zone, but he gave me a very, very watered down version of the full force of what he could have said to me because he knew I wouldn't hear it. And I've really been thinking about this a lot this week. But the conversation was enough to wake me up to some parts of it, added to what other people had been drip feeding to me. And it ended up being enough, and I came home and I started to see the world really differently. I started to value myself a little differently. I started to hear a no, and I started to speak a no. And something rose in me because someone questioned whether I was part of the story or was it only Jesus who could save me? Did I have no say in what was happening to me? The final clip from Stranger Things shows how some things are so extreme they won't be believed, so watering them down can be necessary. Now, I have mixed feelings about this because, on the one hand, if you don't believe some things are being watered down in what you read on a daily basis, you really should, because we are being manipulated a lot. That's how rhetoric works. That's how the world works. But I just want you to just let me go with my train of thought for now, because I'm not saying that this is right. Because I was originally going to show you this as a we must never water things down. But then I remembered this moment in 2007. And I recall many moments where people have not sought to just trash my mind, heart, and dogmas because they knew I was holding on to them like a life raft. So all they could do was just lovingly give me some questions. They got that I would drown if I let go, but they understood I would also drown if I didn't. And there's such wisdom, and I think if Q's going to be anything, we have to be so wise, because people could drown if they let go, but they will also drown if they don't, and we must remember both. And we're not wanting to offer you a life raft at Q or to rip anything out from under you. We're wanting to show you that you're indeed the ocean, and therefore it's not a threat. You can be one with it. You can embrace it. But where we have been clinging on so tightly, that's a big move. So I don't want to invite you to ask Jesus into your life. I want to simply say again, as we've heard before, Christ in you. The all in you. That's the story. That's always been the story. And it's all that is in you, all that is you, all that is not you, and both all. So I swapped my Jesus alone will save Jenny story for a Jenny can save Jenny story, because I'm part of the all, Christ in me. I am the magic touch, and so are you. When we show up, when we stay awake, when we take the questions, when we get honest, when we breathe it all in and say, okay, what's the next right thing in this moment? That is the most alive, authentic, non-religious, godly move I can make. And it's an effortful life, not the someone needs to fix it for me life. I was not lazy. I've never been lazy. If anything, I take too much responsibility and I need to stop. But I did have this sense in which when things got really difficult, I would just hide and hope and abdicate that responsibility, absolutely. So I want to invite you to ask you into your life. But you might think, but I'm the problem. No, I am, and you're part of the all. But the reason you don't want that answer is because it means it's on you. That means you've got some decisions to make. That's why we don't like this version of the story, because it's one of great empowerment, and it will make us far better world changers when the only hope we had was that God, in whatever form, can be persuaded to show up if all of the criteria for him doing so is met. So perhaps the only condition for Christ in us to be met is to say, I'm in our own lives. And I just want to end with this thought. I am still living in the daily consequences of the fact that I was not living consciously back then. And I will live in the consequences of that for the rest of my life in practical ways. It's actually the reason I only had one child, for example. I'm all right with that, to be fair. One's enough, he's perfect. But he's not. But what this doesn't do is take away any of the consequences we've experienced while we were being unconscious. But what the all is enough for is to cover us as we have to then walk out what we did when we didn't know we were doing it. And it's big enough for that too. So I hope you've heard my heart, and I really hope you go away and think about what I've said this morning, because I genuinely believe that if you invite you into your life, that is absolutely going to be one of the best things that some of you can do. And let's live like that. Thank you.